The crystalline spires of Zenthora gleamed under the twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the peaceful prosperity that had defined the Galactic Union for 3 millennia. High Chancellor Vexera stood before the massive viewport in the Union Council chambers, her 4 arms folded behind her back as she gazed out at the bustling space traffic. Merchant vessels from dozens of species moved in orderly patterns, their hulls bearing the symbols of trade guilds that had grown fat on centuries of peaceful commerce. "The quarterly reports are most encouraging, High Chancellor," said Deputy Administrator Keelion, his insectoid features clicking with satisfaction as he reviewed the holographic displays floating between them. "Trade revenues are up 12% across all sectors. The peace dividend continues to pay handsomely." Vexera's elongated head nodded slowly, but something nagged at the edges of her consciousness. The Zephyrian Chancellor had always possessed an intuitive grasp of galactic politics that had served her well during her rise to power. Today, however, that intuition whispered warnings she couldn't quite articulate. "Tell me again about these Terrans," she said, turning from the viewport. Her violet eyes, large even by Zephyrian standards, fixed on the holographic star map that dominated the center of the chamber. A small, unremarkable yellow star glowed faintly in what the Union classified as Sector 7739, far from any major trade routes or strategic resources. Helion's mandibles clicked nervously. "A primitive species, High Chancellor. They've only recently achieved basic stellar flight. Our scouts report they possess rudimentary fusion technology and have established a few mining outposts in their system. Nothing more advanced than what we'd expect from a Class 4 developing civilization. And their response to our standard first contact protocols? Most unusual." Helion's compound eyes shifted colors, indicating discomfort. "They haven't responded to any of our diplomatic overtures. No acknowledgement of our authority, no requests for Union membership, no trade proposals. They simply ignore us." Vexera's secondary hands began to fidget, a habit she'd never quite managed to suppress despite decades in politics. In her experience, new species fell into predictable categories when first contacted by the Union. Most immediately sought membership, recognizing the obvious benefits of joining a galactic civilization that had eliminated war, poverty, and most forms of suffering. Others, usually the more primitive ones, would cower in fear or attempt futile acts of aggression before eventually being pacified and incorporated. The Terrans did neither. They simply continued about their business as if the most powerful interstellar government in known space didn't exist. "Perhaps they're simply overwhelmed," suggested Sub-Administrator Felka, her amphibious features glistening under the chamber's artificial lighting. "First contact can be traumatic for primitive minds. We should consider sending a larger diplomatic mission, maybe include some cultural specialists." "Or perhaps," interjected military advisor Threngax, his massive frame shifting in the specially reinforced chair designed to accommodate his rock-like physiology, "they're being deliberately provocative. Some species react to our peaceful overtures with suspicion, thinking we show weakness." Vexera considered this. The Union's military might was absolute, built on the combined technologies and resources of over 2,000 member species. The enforcement fleet alone commanded more firepower than most galactic civilizations could muster in their entire history. It had been nearly 800 years since any species had been foolish enough to resist Union authority through force, and that conflict had lasted less than 6 hours. "What do we know about their military capabilities?" she asked. Threngax's granite features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. "Laughable, High Chancellor. They possess no energy weapons beyond basic fusion reactions. Their largest vessels are crude chemical propulsion craft barely capable of interplanetary travel. Our analysis suggests their entire military could be neutralized by a single Union patrol squadron. Then, why do they ignore us?" The question hung in the air like a toxic gas. Throughout Union history, the pattern had been consistent: contact, brief negotiation, integration. The process was so standardized that entire departments existed solely to manage the transition of new member species into Union society. Cultural adaptation programs, economic integration protocols, technological uplifting initiatives, all refined through centuries of experience. Perhaps, Vexera said slowly, we should pay these Terrans a more personal visit. Prepare the diplomatic vessel Harmony's promise for departure to their system. Full ceremonial escort, I want them to understand exactly whom they're dealing with. Helian's mandibles clicked rapidly. High Chancellor, surely a lesser delegation would suffice. These are primitives, after all. Your personal presence might be excessive. On the contrary, Vexera replied, her violet eyes taking on a harder cast. I suspect these Terrans need to see Union authority firsthand. Sometimes primitives require a demonstration of superiority before they can properly appreciate the benefits of civilization. 3 days later, the diplomatic flotilla emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The Harmony's promise was a masterwork of Union engineering, its biometallic hull stretching nearly 2 kilometers in length. Its escort consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, each one capable of sterilizing planetary surfaces with casual ease. The fleet's combined technologies represented the pinnacle of achievement for 47 different species. Impressive little system, Admiral Corventier commented from the bridge of the Harmony's promise. The grizzled Tarkonian had commanded Union fleets for 3 centuries, and his cybernetic implants allowed him to interface directly with the ship's sensor array. Their star is remarkably stable, and they've managed to establish mining operations throughout the outer planets. Crude work, but surprisingly extensive for such a young species. Vexera studied the tactical displays with growing interest. The Terrans had indeed been busy. Asteroid mining platforms dotted the system, connected by shipping routes that buzzed with constant traffic. Massive orbital habitats rotated slowly around their homeworld, their lights visible even at this distance. Population estimates, she asked. Approximately 15 billion in system, High Chancellor. Roughly 12 billion on their homeworld, with the remainder distributed across various orbital and planetary installations. They've completely colonized their 4th planet and have substantial operations around their largest gas giant. 15 billion, Vexera murmured. For such a young species, that's remarkable population management. Most primitives struggle to support even single-digit billions. Perhaps they're more advanced than our initial surveys indicated, suggested Helion. Before Vexera could respond, the ship's communication officer, a nervous Polarian whose translucent skin flushed purple under stress, announced incoming signals. High Chancellor, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the system interior. They appear to be directed at our fleet. Excellent, Vexera said, settling into her command throne. Put them through. Let's see how these Terrans react to proper authority. The main viewscreen flickered to life, revealing a human face that immediately struck Vexera as unusual. Most primitive species, when first encountering Union technology, displayed obvious signs of awe or fear. This human, male, according to the cultural files, simply looked mildly inconvenienced. Unknown vessels, the human said in heavily accented galactic standard, you have entered sovereign Terran space without authorization. Please state your intentions and adjust your course to standard approach vectors immediately. The bridge fell silent. In 3,000 years of Union expansion, no primitive species had ever issued orders to a Union diplomatic fleet. The very concept seemed to short-circuit the standard protocols. Vexera found her voice first. I am High Chancellor Vexera of the Galactic Union. You will lower your defensive posture and prepare to receive our diplomatic delegation. Your species integration into Union society begins now. The human's expression didn't change. High Chancellor, you are not authorized to be in this system. Please state your business and comply with traffic control instructions, or you will be escorted out. Admiral Corventier's cybernetic implants sparked with indignation. High Chancellor, this is intolerable. A primitive species cannot dictate terms to the Union. I request permission to demonstrate our capabilities. But, Vexera held up one of her forehands, fascinated despite herself. Human, I think you misunderstand your situation. We represent a galactic civilization spanning thousands of worlds. Your cooperation would be wise. Ma'am, the human replied with what appeared to be genuine patience, I don't care if you represent the entire universe. You're in Terran space without permission, and that makes you trespassers. Now, are you going to comply with traffic control, or do we need to have a different kind of conversation? The transmission ended. For nearly a full minute, the bridge remained frozen in stunned silence. Finally, Communications Officer Yelenka spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. High Chancellor, should I attempt to re-establish contact? Before Vexera could respond, the ship's tactical systems erupted in alarms. Sensor readings flooded the displays as previously invisible objects throughout the system suddenly revealed themselves. What the Union fleet had assumed were asteroids began moving with purpose. Mining platforms reconfigured themselves into weapons emplacements. Civilian traffic patterns shifted into clearly military formations. Analysis, Admiral Corvin barked, his implants interfacing frantically with the ship's computers. Stealth fields are dropping throughout the system, reported the tactical officer, a multi-limbed Zeronian whose natural paranoia made him excellent at threat assessment. I'm reading, impossible. High Chancellor, I'm detecting over 3,000 combat-capable vessels in this system. They were completely hidden until now. 3,000? Vexera's voice cracked slightly. That's impossible. Our surveys showed they barely had basic spaceflight. The signatures are unusual, the tactical officer continued, his sensor stalks weaving frantically through the air as new data poured in. Their technology doesn't match any known paradigms. Energy outputs are consistent with Union-level capabilities, but the underlying principles are completely alien. Admiral Corvin studied the tactical displays with growing unease. High Chancellor, I'm seeing weapon systems that shouldn't be possible. Their energy signatures suggest they're drawing power from sources I can't identify. Some of these vessels are reading as larger than Union dreadnoughts. Vexera's political instincts, honed through decades of navigating galactic diplomacy, suddenly screamed danger. The Terrans hadn't ignored Union authority out of ignorance or arrogance. They'd been evaluating it. Open a channel, she ordered. The same human face appeared on the screen, but now he was clearly aboard a military vessel. Behind him, Vexera could see crew members moving with practiced efficiency, their actions coordinated in a way that spoke of extensive combat experience. This is Admiral Harrison of the Terran Defense Force, the human said. You have 30 seconds to begin immediate departure from our system, or we will consider your presence an act of war. Admiral, Vexera said, struggling to maintain her diplomatic composure, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. The Galactic Union seeks only peaceful contact and mutual cooperation. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss. 20 seconds, Harrison interrupted. Admiral Corvin leaned toward Vexera's throne. High Chancellor, our fleet still possesses superior firepower. If we act quickly, 10 seconds. Vexera looked at the tactical displays showing 3,000 Terran vessels converging on their position. Her political career had been built on reading situations correctly, and everything in her experience told her that these humans were not bluffing. Admiral Harrison, she said quickly, the Union fleet will withdraw immediately. Please accept our apologies for any misunderstanding. Wise choice, Harrison replied. You have 24 hours to clear our territorial boundaries. Any Union vessel detected in Terran space after that deadline will be destroyed without further warning. The transmission ended again, and the Union fleet found itself surrounded by enemy vessels that had appeared from nowhere, wielding technology that defied their understanding of what was possible. As the Harmony's promise began its retreat, Vexera stared at the tactical displays with growing dread. For the first time in Union history, they had encountered a species that didn't simply ignore their authority, it actively rejected it, and possessed the power to enforce that rejection. "Admiral," she said quietly to Corvin, "as soon as we clear their territory, send an emergency transmission to Union Command. Priority Alpha classification." "What should I tell them, High Chancellor?" Vexera watched the Terran vessels escort them toward the system's edge with casual efficiency, their formations speaking of a military doctrine that had been tested in actual combat. "Tell them we need to reconsider our assumptions about primitive species." "And, Admiral?" "Yes, High Chancellor?" "Tell them we may have finally found a species that doesn't want to be saved." The journey back to Union space would take 3 days. For Vexera, every minute of those 3 days would be spent wondering how badly they had misjudged the situation, and what the Terrans might be planning while the Union fleet retreated with their metaphorical tail between their legs. Behind them, the Terran vessels maintained their escort formation until the Union fleet crossed the territorial boundary. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they vanished back into the asteroid fields and space lanes of a system that was clearly far more advanced and far more dangerous than anyone in the Union had imagined. In the depths of space, Admiral Harrison stood on the bridge of the TDF Retribution, watching the Union fleet disappear into hyperspace. Around him, his crew efficiently stood down from combat alert, but the tension in the air remained thick. "Think they'll be back?" asked his tactical officer, Commander Sarah Chen. Harrison studied the long-range sensors, noting how the Union fleet maintained perfect formation even in retreat. They were professional, experienced, and commanded technology that rivaled anything in the Terran arsenal. That made them dangerous in ways that went far beyond simple firepower. "Oh, they'll be back," he said quietly. "The question is whether they'll come back talking or shooting." Behind them, hidden throughout the Sol system, 3,000 Terran vessels resumed their positions. Mining platforms returned to their legitimate functions. Civilian traffic patterns shifted back to normal. To any casual observer, the system appeared exactly as it had before, a young species just beginning to reach for the stars. But appearances, as the Galactic Union was about to learn, could be devastatingly deceiving. The emergency session of the Union Grand Council convened within 18 hours of receiving High Chancellor Vexera's report. Representatives from all major member species materialized as holograms around the massive circular chamber on Zenthera, their forms flickering slightly as quantum entanglement arrays struggled to maintain so many simultaneous connections across galactic distances. Supreme Coordinator Ast Han, eldest of the founding species and effective head of the Union for nearly 2 millennia, called the session to order with a gesture of his crystalline appendages. The ancient being's form resembled living mineral, and, when he spoke, his voice resonated through harmonic frequencies that could be understood by all member species. "Fellow representatives," Ast Han intoned, "we face an unprecedented situation. High Chancellor Vexera will present her findings regarding the species designation Terran." Vexera stood at the center of the chamber, her 4 arms arranged in the formal diplomatic posture required for Grand Council addresses. Around her, holographic faces representing 2,000 civilizations focused their attention with the gravity such an emergency session demanded. "Honored representatives," she began, "what we discovered in Sector 7739 challenges our fundamental understanding of species development and first contact protocols." The massive display screens around the chamber came to life, showing tactical recordings from the encounter. Gasps and clicking sounds echoed from various representatives as they watched Terran vessels appear from seemingly empty space, their formations suggesting military capabilities far beyond what any survey had indicated. "These Terrans," Vexera continued, "possess stealth technology that rendered our sensors completely useless. Their fleet strength exceeds 3,000 combat-capable vessels, many of which display energy signatures comparable to our own Dreadnought-class ships. Most concerning, they demonstrated complete strategic awareness of our capabilities while keeping their own carefully hidden." Representative Quilzen of the Aquatic Collective raised one of her tentacled appendages. High Chancellor, surely this is simply a case of inaccurate initial surveys. Perhaps these Terrans are a remnant population of some lost civilization, using inherited technology they don't fully understand. That was my first assumption, Vexera replied, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Their communications protocols, tactical responses, and technological integration all point to a species that developed these capabilities independently. More troubling, they displayed no interest whatsoever in Union membership, trade agreements, or technological exchange. A low rumble filled the chamber as Representative Morgath of the Predator clans voiced his thoughts. The massive reptilian's scarred hide bore the marks of countless battles from his species' violent past, before Union integration had channeled their aggressive tendencies into peaceful pursuits. Perhaps, Morgath growled, these Terrans simply need a demonstration of superior force. In my experience, young species often posture beyond their actual capabilities. A show of strength usually clarifies their thinking. Supreme Coordinator Aestihan's crystalline form pulsed with subtle colors that indicated deep consideration. High Chancellor Vexera, what is your assessment of Terran military capabilities relative to our own? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For 3 millennia, the Union had maintained absolute military supremacy through the simple expedient of overwhelming technological and numerical advantage. No species had ever challenged that supremacy and survived to tell of it. Unknown, Vexera admitted, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Admiral Corventiach's analysis suggests their technology operates on principles we don't recognize. Their energy signatures are consistent with Union-level capabilities, but the underlying mechanisms remain a mystery. Representative Felnar of the Synthetic Coalition, their mechanical form gleaming under the chamber's lighting, processed this information through quantum-level analysis matrices. High Chancellor, this suggests the Terrans have developed alternate technological pathways to achieve comparable results. Such parallel evolution is theoretically possible but unprecedented in recorded galactic history. Which raises the question, interjected Representative Ythera of the Hive Minds, of how a species could achieve such advancement in isolation. Our models clearly demonstrate that technological development requires extensive interspecies cooperation and resource sharing. Vexera had wrestled with the same question during the 3-day journey back to Union space. Everything in Union doctrine suggested that advanced civilizations naturally gravitated toward cooperation and integration. Species that remained isolated either stagnated technologically or destroyed themselves through warfare. The Terrans appeared to be an impossible anomaly, a species that had achieved advanced technology while remaining not only isolated, but actively resistant to outside contact. There's another possibility we must consider, said Representative Keth Morn of the Scientific Directorate, his elongated skull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns indicating deep analysis. Perhaps the Terrans have been observing galactic civilization for some time, studying our methods and developing countermeasures. A chill settled over the chamber as the implications became clear. If the Terrans had been watching the Union, studying their expansion methods and developing responses, it would explain their tactical awareness and technological preparation. Supreme Coordinator Aestihan's form shifted through several color patterns before settling on a deep blue that indicated grave concern. The question before us is clear: how do we respond to a species that rejects Union authority and possesses the apparent capability to enforce that rejection? Representative Morgatha's massive head swayed from side to side, a gesture indicating predatory calculation. The answer is equally clear, Supreme Coordinator. We demonstrate that their capabilities, whatever they may be, are insufficient to challenge Union supremacy. A properly prepared military expedition should suffice. And, if it doesn't suffice, asked Representative Felka, her amphibious features glistening with nervous moisture. What if the Terrans possess capabilities we haven't yet discovered? A military confrontation could prove costly. Costly to whom? Morgatha's voice carried undertones of the hunting calls his species had used before Union integration. No single species, regardless of technological advancement, can challenge the combined might of 2,000 civilizations. The mathematics alone make Terran resistance impossible. But, even as Morgath spoke with typical predator confidence, other representatives began accessing their species' historical databases, searching for precedents that might guide their response. The problem, as became quickly apparent, was that no precedents existed. In 3,000 years of expansion, the Union had encountered aggressive species, fearful species, technologically advanced species, and culturally complex species. They had never encountered a species that simply said no and possessed the power to make it stick. Representative Thexolin of the merchant guilds raised a practical concern that cut through the military posturing. Regardless of our eventual response, we need more information. Our current understanding of Terran capabilities is woefully inadequate for any kind of strategic planning. Agreed, said Astihun. High Chancellor Vexera, I'm authorizing a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation. Covert surveillance, long-range sensor sweeps, communications intercepts, whatever is necessary to develop a complete picture of Terran society and capabilities. Supreme Coordinator, Vexera said carefully, the Terrans demonstrated remarkable sensor technology. Any covert operations carry significant risk of detection. Then, we'll maintain plausible deniability, Astihun replied. Independent traders, exploration vessels, scientific surveys, nothing that can be directly traced to Union authority. But, we need information before we can make informed decisions. The session continued for several more hours, with representatives debating response options that ranged from economic pressure to full military intervention. But, beneath the formal diplomatic discourse, a new current of uncertainty flowed through Union leadership. For the first time in millennia, they faced a problem that couldn't be solved through superior technology, overwhelming force, or diplomatic pressure. The Terrans had demonstrated that they possessed all three in sufficient quantities to challenge Union authority, and they'd made it clear that they had no interest in negotiation. As the session concluded and holographic representatives began disconnecting from the quantum entanglement arrays, Vexera found herself alone with Supreme Coordinator Astihun in the vast chamber. Your honest assessment, High Chancellor, Astihun said, his crystalline form shifting to deeper blue hues. Are the Terrans truly as dangerous as they appear? Vexera considered the question carefully. Throughout her career, she'd built a reputation for accurate threat assessment and political pragmatism. Both instincts now screamed warnings that she struggled to articulate. Supreme Coordinator, I believe we're dealing with a species unlike any we've encountered before. They didn't react with fear, awe, or aggression when confronted with Union authority. They responded with professional competence. That suggests a level of preparation and strategic thinking that concerns me greatly. You believe they've been planning for this encounter? I believe they've been planning for something much worse than this encounter, Vexera replied. Their entire military posture suggests a species that has prepared for large-scale conflict against technologically superior opponents. The question isn't whether they can challenge us, it's whether they can survive us, and what they're willing to do to ensure that survival. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, Admiral Harrison stood before the Terran Defense Council in the underground command complex beneath Luna City. The chamber carved from solid rock 200 meters below the lunar surface, its walls lined with displays showing real-time intelligence from throughout known space. The Union fleet has returned to their territory, Harrison reported to the 12-member council that governed Terran defense policy. Our long-range sensors tracked them to a staging area approximately 40 light-years from our borders. They're maintaining position there, presumably while their leadership decides on next steps. Council Chairman Rodriguez, a weathered veteran whose cybernetic arm bore the scars of the Centauri conflict, leaned back in his chair. Any indication of their intentions? Communications intercepts suggest they're preparing some kind of intelligence-gathering operation, replied Dr. Chen, the TDF's chief intelligence analyst. Nothing overt, but we're detecting increased scout ship activity along our outer perimeter. Let them look, said Counselor Park, her dark eyes reflecting the cold calculation that had made her one of Terran space's most effective strategic planners. The more they see of our defensive capabilities, the more likely they are to reconsider any aggressive action. But Harrison wasn't convinced that displaying strength would deter the Union. His study of their historical expansion patterns suggested an organization accustomed to getting its way through a combination of overwhelming superiority and diplomatic pressure. Species that couldn't be overwhelmed were simply eliminated. Ma'am, he said carefully, I recommend we consider the possibility that deterrence may not be sufficient. The Union represents over 2,000 species with a combined military-industrial capacity that dwarfs anything we can field. If they decide we're a threat that needs to be eliminated, then we'll eliminate them first, interrupted Counselor Vega, his scarred face bearing the marks of someone who'd seen too much combat to worry about diplomatic niceties. We've prepared for this scenario for 2 centuries, Admiral. Every simulation, every wargame, every strategic analysis has pointed toward the same conclusion. Eventually, we'd encounter a galactic power that wanted to control us. Harrison nodded grimly. The Terran Defense Force existed because humanity's expansion into space had been marked by conflicts that most species never experienced. The Centauri War, the vegan incidents, the breakdown of the Proxima Accords, each had taught brutal lessons about the realities of interstellar politics. Unlike the species that composed the Galactic Union, humanity had learned early that survival in space required more than technological advancement. It required the willingness to fight for independence, no matter the cost. Our deep space monitoring stations are reporting increased Union activity throughout this entire sector, Dr. Chin continued. Long-range reconnaissance vessels, scientific survey ships, merchant traffic, all increasing by roughly 300% over the past week. They're mapping our defenses, Chairman Rodriguez concluded. Standard pre-invasion intelligence gathering. The question is whether they're planning a limited demonstration of force or something more comprehensive. Counselor Park accessed her personal database, reviewing contingency plans that had been developed over decades of strategic planning. Admiral, what's the current status of the outer defense grid? Fully operational, Harrison replied. All monitoring stations are active, stealth platforms are positioned throughout the outer system, and the rapid response fleets are maintaining ready status. And the special projects? Harrison's expression darkened. Project Damocles is complete and awaiting authorization. Project Armageddon remains in final testing phases, but could be operational within 72 hours if necessary. The chamber fell silent as the implications hung in the air. Projects Damocles and Armageddon represented humanity's ultimate contingency plans, weapons systems developed specifically for warfare against technologically superior opponents. They were tools designed not for victory, but for making victory so costly that even overwhelming enemies would prefer negotiation to conflict. I hope it doesn't come to that, Chairman Rodriguez said quietly. But if the Union insists on treating us as just another primitive species to be integrated or eliminated, then they'll learn why humans survived to reach the stars, Admiral Harrison finished. And why we've stayed independent for 200 years. Outside the underground complex, Luna City continued its normal operations, millions of citizens going about their daily lives, unaware that their government was preparing for a war that could determine humanity's survival as an independent species. But, in the depths of space, Union reconnaissance vessels continued their careful observation of Terran space, gathering intelligence that would soon force both civilizations to confront a fundamental question. Could 2 incompatible philosophies of governance coexist in the same galaxy, or would one inevitably destroy the other? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and, when it did, the galaxy would learn why humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for the worst-case scenario, and why their definition of worst case was far more terrifying than anything the Galactic Union had ever imagined. The Union intelligence vessel Silent Observer drifted through the asteroid belt of the Ross 128 system, its advanced stealth systems rendering it virtually invisible to conventional sensors. Captain Zextil, a veteran intelligence operative whose previous career had involved infiltrating 14 different species during their integration into the Union, studied the long-range sensor data with growing unease. "Analysis complete, Captain," reported his sensor operator, a nervous Zalarian whose multifaceted eyes could process electromagnetic spectra far beyond most species' capabilities. "The Terran border defenses are extensive." Zextil's elongated cranium tilted as he absorbed the tactical data flowing across his command console. 3 weeks of covert reconnaissance had revealed a defensive network that defied every conventional understanding of how primitive species organized their military assets. "Show me the distribution pattern," he ordered. The holographic display came alive with tactical markers, each representing a detected Terran installation. What should have been scattered defensive positions around their home system instead formed concentric shells of protection extending nearly 20 light-years in every direction. Monitoring stations, weapon platforms, and what appeared to be automated defense networks covered approach vectors that most species wouldn't even consider strategically relevant. "Captain," the sensor operator said, his voice quavering slightly, "I'm detecting active scanning from at least 3 different sources. They know we're here." Before Zextil could respond, his communications array activated without authorization. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to a young human female, her expression conveying the kind of polite professionalism that somehow felt more threatening than outright hostility. "Union vessel silent observer," she said, reading his ship's designation from what should have been highly classified databases. "This is Commander Torres of the Terran Defense Force. You are currently in violation of territorial boundaries established under the Sol Accords. Please adjust your course to the designated exit vector immediately." Zextil's blood ran cold. The Sol Accords had been classified documents, internal Terran legislation that Union intelligence had only managed to partially decode through months of careful signals intercepts. The fact that this human was referencing them suggested either a severe intelligence breach or capabilities far beyond what Union analysts had estimated. "Commander Torres," he replied, struggling to maintain the diplomatic protocols that had served him throughout decades of covert operations, "I believe there's been some misunderstanding. This vessel is conducting routine astronomical surveys and," Captain Zextil, Torres interrupted, "your vessel is equipped with Class 7 intelligence gathering arrays, quantum entanglement communication systems, and stealth technology based on Zephyrian phase variance principles. You are not conducting astronomical surveys." The bridge fell silent. Torres had just demonstrated detailed knowledge of Union military classifications, his personal identity, and technological specifications that should have been impossible for any non-Union species to access. Furthermore, Torres continued, "This is the 4th Union intelligence vessel we've detected in our territory over the past 2 weeks. That constitutes a pattern of aggressive surveillance that we find concerning." Zextil's tactical training kicked in, analyzing the situation through protocols developed over millennia of successful intelligence operations. The Terrans had detected not only his vessel, but 3 others operating under complete stealth protocols. They possessed detailed intelligence about Union technology and personnel. Most disturbing, they seemed to view Union intelligence gathering as a prelude to hostile action. "Commander," he said carefully, "the Union has no hostile intentions toward your species. We simply seek understanding and mutual cooperation. Captain, we've been monitoring Union communications for some time now. We're aware that your leadership is debating military intervention against our species. Under those circumstances, we consider all Union activity in our territory to be potentially hostile." The transmission ended, leaving Zextil staring at a blank screen while proximity alarms screamed throughout his ship. The asteroid field around them was coming alive with previously hidden Terran vessels, their weapons systems already trained on the silent observer. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "I'm detecting 12 Terran interceptors moving to surround us. Energy signatures suggest weapons capable of penetrating our defensive screens." Zextil faced a decision that would define his career and possibly determine the course of Union-Terran relations. He could attempt to fight his way out, demonstrating Union military capabilities but almost certainly triggering a larger conflict. He could surrender, accepting humiliation but preserving his crew and ship. Or he could try to negotiate, though the Terrans had made their position abundantly clear. "Open a channel to the Terran forces," he ordered. Commander Torres appeared on screen again, but now she was clearly aboard a military vessel, surrounded by displays showing tactical information that included detailed specifications of his own ship. "Captain, you have 2 minutes to begin departure from our territory, or we will disable your vessel and escort you out. Your choice." "Commander, I'm prepared to withdraw immediately, but I request permission to transmit a message to my superiors explaining, 30 seconds, Captain. And be aware that any transmissions you send will be monitored and analyzed. If they contain intelligence about our defensive capabilities, we'll consider that an act of espionage with appropriate consequences." Zextil authorized immediate departure, his ship's engines spinning up for the jump to hyperspace. As the silent observer fled Terran territory under escort, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed something unprecedented in Union history, a primitive species treating Union forces as if they were the inferior party in the encounter. The intelligence report he filed upon returning to Union space would send shockwaves through every level of the military hierarchy. Supreme Coordinator Ast-Han reviewed the compiled intelligence reports in his private chambers, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated deep concern. Around him, holographic displays showed the combined findings from 4 separate reconnaissance missions, all of which had reached the same disturbing conclusions. "Admiral Corventier," he said to the grizzled Tarkonian whose image flickered in the quantum entanglement array, "summarize your analysis." "Supreme Coordinator," Corventier replied, his cybernetic implants interfacing with tactical databases as he spoke, "the Terrans have constructed the most sophisticated defensive network I've encountered in 3 centuries of military service. Their sensor coverage extends far beyond any reasonable territorial claims. Their response times suggest automated systems capable of real-time threat assessment, and their intelligence capabilities rival our own. More concerning," added Intelligence Director Morveth, her insectoid features clicking with agitation, "they demonstrate detailed knowledge of our operational procedures, technology specifications, and even classified personnel files. Either they've achieved impossible intelligence penetration of our systems, or they've developed analytical capabilities that allow them to deduce classified information from limited observations." Ast-Han processed this information through cognitive matrices honed by 2 millennia of leadership experience. The implications were staggering. If the Terrans possessed intelligence capabilities comparable to Union standards, they would know about Union military strength, deployment patterns, and strategic planning. They would understand exactly what they were facing if conflict erupted. "Director Morveth," he said, "what's your assessment of Terran intentions?" "Based on their defensive preparations and military doctrine, they're planning for large-scale conflict against technologically superior opponents. Their entire civilization appears organized around the principle of maintaining independence at any cost." "Any cost?" "Supreme Coordinator, the Terrans have devoted approximately 30% of their industrial capacity to military applications. For comparison, most Union member species maintain between 2 and 5% military allocation. This suggests a species that views conflict as inevitable rather than exceptional." Admiral Corventier's image shifted as he accessed additional tactical files. "Supreme Coordinator, there's another aspect of this situation that concerns me greatly. The Terrans aren't simply preparing for defensive warfare, they're preparing for offensive operations as well." "Explain." "Their fleet composition includes significant numbers of long-range strike vessels, logistics support ships, and what appear to be specialized assault craft. This is the military profile of a species preparing to project power far beyond their home territory." The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Union had assumed they were dealing with a defiant but ultimately defensive species that could be contained within their own territory. If the Terrans possessed offensive capabilities comparable to their demonstrated defensive strength, the strategic calculus changed completely. "There's one more item," Intelligence Director Morveth said, her voice carrying undertones of genuine fear. "Our communications intercepts have detected references to something the Terrans call contingency protocols. We haven't been able to decode the specific details, but the energy signatures associated with these projects suggest weapons systems of unprecedented destructive capability." ASDHAN's form cycled through color patterns representing deep analysis and growing alarm. Throughout Union history, military conflicts had been resolved through superior technology and overwhelming force. Species that resisted integration were simply crushed through applications of power that left no room for doubt about the outcome. The Terrans appeared to represent something entirely new, a species that had anticipated such tactics and developed countermeasures specifically designed to make conquest prohibitively expensive, even for a galactic superpower. "Admiral," ASDHAN said finally, "what are our options for military resolution of this situation?" Corvinth's cybernetic implants sparked as he processed tactical scenarios through quantum-level analysis systems. "Supreme Coordinator, based on current intelligence, I can guarantee victory over the Terrans through sufficient application of force. However, the cost would be significant." Define significant. Conservative estimates suggest we would need to deploy approximately 40% of the Union's total military assets to ensure successful conquest of Terran territory. Casualties could reach into the billions, and the economic cost would require massive resource reallocation from civilian to military production. "And that assumes," added Intelligence Director Morveth, "that the Terrans don't possess capabilities we haven't yet discovered. Their demonstrated technological sophistication suggests they may have developed weapons systems that could inflict even greater casualties on Union forces." ASDHAN considered the stark mathematics of interstellar warfare. The Union commanded resources from 2,000 civilizations, industrial capacity beyond any historical precedent, and military technology refined through millennia of development. But even infinite resources became meaningless if victory required costs that threatened the stability of galactic civilization itself. "There is another option," he said quietly. "Negotiation." The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic gas. Throughout Union history, negotiation had been a tool used to manage member species and resolve internal disputes. It had never been applied to a situation where the Union's fundamental authority was being challenged by an outside force. "Supreme Coordinator," Admiral Corvinth said carefully, "negotiation implies recognition of Terran sovereignty and legitimacy. It would set a precedent that could encourage other species to resist Union integration. The alternative," ASDHAN replied, "may be a war that damages the Union more severely than any external threat in our history." The debate continued for hours, touching on strategic considerations, economic implications, and political ramifications that could reshape galactic civilization. But, beneath the formal analysis, all participants grappled with a more fundamental question: what happened when an irresistible force encountered an object that refused to move? While the Union leadership debated their options, humanity prepared for the inevitable escalation with the methodical thoroughness that had characterized their expansion into space. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, Project Damocles reached final operational status. The weapon system, designed specifically for warfare against technologically superior opponents, represented the culmination of 2 centuries of military innovation. Admiral Harrison stood in the control center, watching as technicians completed the final calibration sequences. Around him, displays showed real-time intelligence from throughout Union space, gathered by a network of monitoring stations that the Union still didn't know existed. "Project status?" he asked. "Damocles is fully operational," reported Chief Engineer Nakamura, her cybernetic interface allowing direct communication with the weapon system's AI components. "All targeting parameters are confirmed, and we have lock-on capability for targets up to 1,500 light-years distant." "Armageddon?" "Still in final testing, but we expect full operational status within 48 hours, replied Dr. Voss, the lead scientist on humanity's most classified military project. The quantum cascade generators are stable, and the delivery systems have passed all simulation testing. Harrison nodded grimly. Projects Damocles and Armageddon represented humanity's ultimate contingency plans, weapons designed not to win wars, but to make wars so catastrophically expensive that even enemies with overwhelming advantages would prefer peace to victory. Sir, his communications officer announced, we're receiving priority transmissions from our deep space monitoring networks. Union fleet movements suggest they're preparing for some kind of large-scale operation. Analysis? Fleet compositions suggest either a massive reconnaissance mission or preliminary deployment for military action. Either way, they're moving significant assets toward our border regions. Harrison studied the tactical displays with the cold calculation that had made him humanity's most effective military commander. The Union was testing humanity's resolve, probing for weaknesses while building up forces for whatever action their leadership ultimately decided upon. But they were operating under assumptions that hadn't been valid for 200 years. Humanity had learned harsh lessons about survival in an hostile universe, and those lessons had shaped every aspect of their civilization's development. Unlike the species that composed the Galactic Union, humans had never enjoyed the luxury of peaceful expansion. Every step into space had been fought for, every colony established through struggle, every technological advance purchased with blood and sacrifice. The Union represented everything humanity had rejected: centralized authority, imposed peace, and the elimination of individual freedom in exchange for security and prosperity. It was a seductive offer, but one that humans had learned to view with deep suspicion. Status of the civilian evacuation protocols? Harrison asked. All non-essential personnel have been relocated to deep space facilities, his aide replied. Essential infrastructure remains operational, but civilian casualties will be minimized if hostilities commence. And our allies? The Centauri Federation has confirmed they will honor the mutual defense agreements. The vegan Commonwealth is maintaining official neutrality, but their intelligence services are sharing Union fleet movement data. The remaining independent systems are watching and waiting to see how this develops. Harrison nodded. Humanity hadn't been completely isolated during their expansion into space. They'd formed alliances with other species that shared their commitment to independence, creating a loose confederation of worlds that preferred freedom to the safety offered by Union membership. It wasn't much compared to the Union's overwhelming might, but it represented something the Union had never faced: a coalition of species united not by central authority, but by shared commitment to self-determination. Sir, his tactical officer announced, long-range sensors are detecting a Union fleet massing at the edge of our detection grid. Preliminary count suggests over 300 vessels, including multiple dreadnought-class ships. Time to intercept? If they maintain current course and speed, approximately 72 hours. Harrison turned to face his senior staff, men and women who had dedicated their lives to preparing for this exact scenario. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears our preparations are about to be tested. All departments, implement Condition 1 protocols. This is not a drill. Throughout human space, military installations shifted to maximum alert status. Civilian populations moved to protected facilities. Defensive systems that had remained hidden for decades revealed themselves, bristling with weapons technologies that the Union had never seen before. And, in the depths of space, automated monitoring stations began transmitting final intelligence reports to their controllers, documenting the movements of a Union fleet that was about to discover why humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for the worst-case scenario. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes, when an irresistible force met an immovable object, the result wasn't philosophical paradox but explosive conflict that would reshape the nature of interstellar civilization itself. The Union enforcement fleet assembled at the edge of Terran space represented the largest military deployment in galactic history. Admiral Corvin Th stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Universal Justice, watching as 347 vessels arranged themselves in battle formation. The combined firepower of his fleet could sterilize entire star systems, and its technological superiority should have made any resistance futile. Yet as he reviewed the tactical displays showing Terran defensive positions, Corvin Th couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap designed by an enemy who understood Union capabilities far better than the Union understood theirs. "Fleet status report," he ordered. "All vessels at full combat readiness, Admiral," replied his tactical coordinator, a young Polarian whose translucent skin flushed with excitement at the prospect of the Union's first major military action in 8 centuries. "Weapons systems charged, defensive screens at maximum, and all communication arrays synchronized for coordinated operations." Corvin Th nodded, but his cybernetic implants continued processing intelligence data that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The Terrans had used the 3 months since first contact to reveal defensive capabilities that defied conventional tactical analysis. Weapons platforms that materialized from seemingly empty space. Energy signatures that suggested power generation methods unknown to Union science. And, most troubling, communications intercepts that indicated the humans were not merely prepared for this confrontation, they were eager for it. "Admiral," his intelligence officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Terran Defense Force. They're requesting communication." Corvin Th authorized the transmission, expecting the usual pre-battle negotiations, threats, demands, or possibly surrender offers from a species that had finally recognized the hopelessness of their position. Instead, Admiral Harrison appeared on the screen, looking relaxed and confident in a way that immediately set off every alarm in Corvin Th's tactical database. "Admiral Corvin Th," Harrison said, "I'm transmitting the coordinates for a neutral meeting point where we can discuss the current situation. I believe a face-to-face conversation would benefit both of our species." The request caught Corvin Th completely off guard. In his 3 centuries of military service, enemy commanders typically made such offers only when facing imminent defeat. Yet every intelligence assessment suggested the Terrans were prepared to fight, not negotiate. "Admiral Harrison," he replied, "your species' continued resistance to Union authority has left us no choice but to demonstrate the consequences of defying galactic law. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with appropriate mercy." Harrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes that made Corvin Th's cybernetic implants register threat level spikes. "Admiral," Harrison said quietly, "you're about to make the largest strategic mistake in galactic history. I'm offering you one chance to avoid catastrophic consequences for both our civilizations. I strongly recommend you accept." The transmission ended, leaving Corvin Th staring at coordinates for a meeting point in empty space between the 2 fleets. His tactical training suggested an obvious trap, but his intelligence assessments indicated something far more concerning: a human commander who genuinely believed he held superior position despite facing overwhelming odds. "Analysis," Corvin Th ordered. "Sir," his tactical officer replied, "the proposed meeting coordinates are in open space, far from any Terran installations. Our sensors detect no hidden weapons or trap signatures. If this is an ambush, it's beyond our ability to detect. And that," Corvin Th muttered, "is exactly what concerns me." 2 hours later, Corvin Th found himself aboard a heavily armed shuttle, escorted by an entire squadron of Union fighters toward the designated coordinates. His decision to accept the meeting had triggered heated debate among his senior staff, but something about Harrison's confidence suggested the human commander possessed information that could change the tactical balance. The Terran vessel that met them was smaller than Union equivalents but clearly military in design. Its hull bore no obvious weapon signatures, yet Corvin Th's enhanced sensors detected energy patterns that defied analysis. Harrison met him in a simple conference room that somehow managed to seem more threatening than the most heavily armed Union warship. The human admiral was younger than Corvin had expected, but his eyes held the kind of hardness that came from extensive combat experience. "Admiral," Harrison said, gesturing toward a chair designed to accommodate Corvin massive frame, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I hope we can avoid the catastrophe that's currently heading toward both our civilizations." Corvin settled into the chair, his cybernetic implants automatically analyzing the room for threats while maintaining diplomatic protocols. "Admiral Harrison, I must confess your confidence is puzzling. You face the largest military fleet ever assembled. Your species possesses impressive defensive capabilities, but mathematics alone should make victory impossible." Harrison activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of both fleets. "Admiral, you're operating under assumptions that are 2 centuries out of date. Let me show you what's about to happen if this conflict proceeds." The display shifted, showing tactical projections that made Corvin implants spike with alarm readings. According to Harrison's analysis, the Terran defensive network extended far beyond anything Union intelligence had detected. Hidden weapon platforms, stealth fleets, and what appeared to be automated defense systems covered approach vectors that should have been impossible to defend. "Impressive," Corvin admitted, but even these capabilities couldn't prevent Union victory through sufficient application of force. "You're right," Harrison agreed. "With enough ships and enough time, the Union could eventually overwhelm our defenses and occupy our territory. But, Admiral, have you considered what that victory would cost you?" The display changed again, now showing casualty projections that made Corvin cybernetic systems register disbelief. According to Harrison's calculations, successful conquest of Terran space would require the Union to accept losses exceeding anything in their military history. "These projections seem optimistic from your perspective," Corvin said carefully. "Actually," Harrison replied, "they're conservative estimates based on our current defensive capabilities." "But, Admiral, those aren't our only capabilities." Harrison activated another display, this one showing energy signatures that defied every technological assumption in Corvin database. The readings suggested weapons systems capable of targeting objects at interstellar distances, power generation that rivaled stellar output, and defensive technologies that operated on principles unknown to Union science. "Projects Damocles and Armageddon," Harrison said quietly. "Weapons systems designed specifically for warfare against technologically superior opponents. Admiral, your fleet represents the most powerful military force in galactic history. But my species has spent 2 centuries preparing to fight that exact force and win." Corvin studied the displays with growing unease. If the Terrans possessed even half the capabilities these projections suggested, the tactical balance wasn't nearly as favorable as Union leadership believed. "Assuming these capabilities are real," he said, "what are you proposing?" "Mutual recognition of sovereignty," Harrison replied. "The Union acknowledges Terran independence and territorial rights. In exchange, humanity agrees to non-interference in Union internal affairs and formal borders that prevent territorial conflicts." "And if the Union refuses?" Harrison's expression grew cold in a way that reminded Corvin why his species had evolved as apex predators. "Then, we'll demonstrate why humans survived to reach the stars, and why we've remained independent for 200 years. Admiral, you're asking me to accept your word that these weapon systems exist and function as advertised. Surely you understand that's insufficient for strategic planning." Harrison smiled, and the expression was far more terrifying than any threat could have been. "Admiral, I'm about to give you a demonstration that should answer any questions about our capabilities. But I want you to understand that what you're about to witness represents approximately 1% of our actual military potential." Before Corvin could respond, his shuttle's communication systems activated automatically. On the screen, Admiral Harrison appeared from the Terran fleet's position, but this was clearly a live transmission rather than a recording. Admiral H. Harrison said, "I'm transmitting coordinates for a series of targets in the outer system. These are automated monitoring stations that have been observing Union fleet movements for the past 3 months. Watch your sensors carefully." H's cybernetic implants interfaced with his shuttle's sensor array, focusing on the designated coordinates. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, space itself seemed to twist as massive energy discharges erupted from empty space, striking targets that were completely invisible to Union sensors. The monitoring stations, each one the size of a small moon, simply ceased to exist. No explosions, no debris fields, no residual energy signatures. They were simply erased from reality with a precision that defied every known physical law. "Range to target?" H asked his shuttle's pilot. 15.7 light-years, Admiral. The energy discharge originated from Terran space and achieved target destruction with 0 time delay. H's implants processed the tactical implications with quantum-level analysis. The Terrans had just demonstrated the ability to destroy objects at interstellar distances instantaneously, using weapons that operated outside known physics. If they could target Union monitoring stations, they could target Union fleets with equal precision. "Project Damocles," Harrison explained calmly. "Quantum-level weapon system capable of targeting any object within a 1,500 light-year radius. Current charge time between shots is approximately 37 hours, but we have multiple installations." "And Armageddon?" Harrison's smile became something that would haunt H's dreams for the rest of his considerably extended life. "Let's hope you never have to find out." The shuttle's communication array crackled as Union fleet commanders throughout the battle group reported sensor readings that confirmed what H had witnessed. The Terrans possessed weapons capabilities that made conventional military planning irrelevant. "Admiral," H said quietly, "I believe this meeting has been enlightening. I'll need to consult with my superiors before making any formal agreements." "Of course," Harrison replied. "But, Admiral, I want you to understand something about my species. We've spent 2 centuries preparing for this confrontation, and we've planned for every possible outcome. If the Union chooses to proceed with military action, we will respond with everything we have. Not because we want war, but because we've learned that freedom is worth any price." As H's shuttle returned to the Union fleet, he found himself facing a strategic situation that no military academy had ever prepared him for. The enemy possessed superior weapons technology, demonstrated capabilities that defied known science, and, most concerning of all, the tactical confidence of a species that had planned extensively for this exact scenario. For the first time in his 3 centuries of military service, Admiral H found himself commanding a fleet that might not be enough to achieve victory. And, as he reviewed the intelligence data from the meeting, he began to understand why the Terrans had seemed so eager for this confrontation. They weren't planning to defend their territory. They were planning to win a war that would reshape the balance of power in galactic civilization itself. The transmission H sent to Union Command carried a priority classification that hadn't been used in 800 years, immediate strategic revision required. But, even as he composed his report, he knew that the political momentum behind the invasion might be too strong to stop. The Union had committed too many resources, involved too many species, and made too many public declarations to withdraw without massive loss of face. They would proceed with the invasion despite the new intelligence, believing that superior numbers could overcome any technological advantage. H hoped they were right, because the alternative was a war that would make every previous galactic conflict look like a minor dispute. And, based on what he'd witnessed during his meeting with Admiral Harrison, he was no longer confident that the Union represented the stronger party in that conflict. Meanwhile, aboard the Terran flagship Retribution, Admiral Harrison reviewed the sensor data from his demonstration with grim satisfaction. The Union commander was competent and experienced, exactly the kind of opponent who would understand the implications of what he'd witnessed. But, competent commanders rarely controlled political decisions, and Harrison's intelligence suggested that Union leadership was too committed to the invasion to accept negotiated settlement. They would proceed with their attack, confident that superior numbers would prevail despite Terran technological advantages. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "all defensive systems are at full readiness. Project Damocles is cycling for additional shots, and Armageddon has achieved final operational status. Fleet disposition? All units in position and maintaining stealth protocols. The Union fleet remains unaware of our actual strength and deployment patterns." Harrison nodded grimly. The Union was about to learn why humanity had rejected every offer of integration and spent centuries preparing for interstellar warfare. They'd discover that some species preferred death to subjugation, and that humans had developed the technology to make that preference devastatingly expensive for their enemies. The war that was about to begin would determine whether the galaxy would be ruled by centralized authority or remain open to independent civilizations. And Admiral Harrison was confident that humanity had prepared the right answer to that question, an answer written in weapons systems that could reach across interstellar distances to deliver consequences that no galactic superpower had ever experienced. The war began not with grand declarations or ceremonial first shots, but with the quiet erasure of 16 Union dreadnoughts that simply ceased to exist while maintaining formation in what their commanders believed was secure space. Admiral Corvin watched the tactical displays with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing the end of everything he'd thought he understood about warfare. One moment, his vanguard fleet was advancing toward Terran territory in perfect battle formation. The next, massive warships that had taken decades to build and represented the pinnacle of Union engineering were gone, leaving behind only empty space and electromagnetic signatures that suggested they'd been disintegrated at the molecular level. "Damage assessment," he ordered, though his cybernetic implants were already processing sensor data that confirmed his worst fears. 16 vessels destroyed, Admiral, reported his tactical coordinator, her Polarian features cycling through colors indicating extreme distress. No debris fields detected, no survivors, no residual energy signatures. They were just eliminated. Time from weapon discharge to target destruction? Instantaneous, sir. The energy signatures originated from Terran space 14 light-years away, but there was no travel time for the destructive effect. Corvin had witnessed Admiral Harrison's demonstration 3 days earlier, but seeing Project Damocles used against Union forces transformed theoretical capability into devastating reality. The humans possessed weapons that operated outside the known laws of physics, striking targets across interstellar distances with precision that made conventional fleet tactics obsolete. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Harrison." The human commander appeared on screen, standing on what was clearly a military command deck. Behind him, tactical displays showed real-time positions of every ship in the Union fleet, along with detailed specifications that should have been impossible for any non-Union species to obtain. "Admiral Corvin Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly what he'd just unleashed, "I want you to know that those 16 ships were selected specifically because they carried minimal crew complements. Approximately 8,000 Union personnel just died to demonstrate a point that I hope you're prepared to take seriously." The number hit Corvin like a physical blow. 8,000 highly trained military professionals, representing dozens of different species and centuries of combined experience, eliminated in an instant to make a tactical demonstration. "What point?" Corvin asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "That this war will end with Union defeat unless you withdraw immediately," Harrison replied. "Admiral, Project Damocles was designed specifically to neutralize large fleets operating in deep space. Range, 1,500 light-years. Recharge time, 37 hours per installation. Current number of operational installations, classified, but sufficient to eliminate your entire fleet over the course of approximately 6 standard days. Corvin-TH's cybernetic implants ran the mathematics automatically. If the Terrans possessed even 12 Damocles installations, they could systematically destroy the entire Union fleet without ever being threatened by return fire. His 347 vessels, representing the largest military deployment in galactic history, were helpless against weapons that struck from impossibly distant positions. "Admiral Harrison," he said carefully, "I'm prepared to discuss ceasefire terms if you're willing to negotiate in good faith." "I'm afraid it's too late for that," Harrison replied. 3 hours ago, your political leadership rejected my final diplomatic overture and issued orders for your fleet to proceed with the invasion regardless of casualties. Your Supreme Coordinator Ast. specifically stated that Union authority cannot be challenged by primitive species under any circumstances. The transmission ended, leaving Corvin-TH to contemplate the political realities that had trapped him in an impossible tactical situation. Union leadership had committed too much prestige and resources to accept negotiated settlement. They would order him to continue the invasion even if it resulted in the destruction of his entire fleet. But, before he could compose a response to Union command, his sensor arrays erupted in proximity alarms. Throughout the outer system, space itself began to tear open as massive objects emerged from what appeared to be hyperspace rifts. Tactical analysis, Corvin-TH ordered, though his implants were already processing sensor data that defied every known technological capability. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "I'm detecting over 800 Terran vessels emerging from stealth positions throughout the system. They were hidden using technology that rendered them completely invisible to our sensor arrays." The holographic tactical display updated to show the true scope of Terran military deployment. What Union intelligence had estimated as a defensive force of 3,000 ships was revealed as over 10,000 vessels, many of them larger than Union dreadnoughts and armed with weapons systems that generated energy signatures beyond conventional measurement. Fleet composition analysis? Unknown vessel classes, sir. Their energy signatures don't match any technology in our databases. Some of these ships appear to be generating more power than our largest space stations. Corvin-TH realized with growing horror that every Union intelligence assessment had been systematically wrong. The Terrans hadn't been hiding their capabilities out of fear, they'd been concealing the true extent of their military strength to ensure Union forces would commit fully to an engagement they couldn't win. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "priority transmission from Admiral Harrison." Harrison appeared on screen again, but now he was flanked by human officers whose uniforms bore insignia indicating specialization in technologies Corvin-TH didn't recognize. "Admiral," Harrison said, "my government has authorized me to proceed with full military response to Union aggression. What you're about to witness is the reason humanity has remained independent for 2 centuries, despite repeated contact with galactic civilizations that wanted to incorporate us." "Admiral Harrison," Corvin-TH interrupted, "I'm prepared to order immediate withdrawal if you'll guarantee safe passage for my forces." "I'm afraid that's no longer possible," Harrison replied. "My intelligence indicates that Union Command has already dispatched reinforcement fleets totaling over 2,000 additional vessels. Your political leadership has decided that losing one fleet is acceptable if it eliminates the threat to Union authority that my species represents." Corvin-TH's implants confirmed the intelligence through quantum-encrypted channels to Union Command. Massive fleet deployments were indeed converging on Terran space, representing nearly half of the Union's total military capacity. "But, Admiral," Harrison continued, "your leaders made their decision based on incomplete information about our capabilities. They believe that sufficient numbers can overcome any technological advantage. They're about to discover why that assumption is incorrect." The tactical display shifted to show energy buildups throughout the Terran fleet that registered beyond the measuring capability of Union sensors. Whatever the humans were preparing to unleash, it operated on a scale that dwarfed anything in known military science. "Project Armageddon," Harrison said quietly. "Quantum cascade weapon designed to demonstrate why wars against humanity are prohibitively expensive, even for galactic superpowers." Before Corvin could ask for clarification, space itself began to convulse around the Union fleet. Reality twisted as quantum fields destabilized, creating cascade effects that propagated faster than light throughout the engagement zone. Ships that had withstood direct fire from the most powerful weapons in galactic history began to disintegrate as their fundamental atomic structures became unstable. Energy shields failed not because they were overwhelmed, but because the physical laws that governed their operations ceased to function properly within the cascade field. Corvin watched in horrified fascination as his fleet, the most powerful military force ever assembled, was systematically destroyed by weapons that attacked the basic foundations of matter itself. Ships didn't explode, they simply stopped existing as coherent objects, their component atoms scattered across space in ways that suggested the Terrans had weaponized quantum mechanics itself. Evacuation protocols, he ordered, though he knew that escape pods would be as vulnerable to quantum cascade effects as the ships that launched them. "Sir," his pilot reported, "quantum cascade fields are expanding throughout the engagement zone. All Union vessels are experiencing structural failure at the molecular level. Estimated survival time in affected areas, less than 10 minutes. Corvin faced the final moments of his career knowing that he was witnessing the end of an era. For 3 millennia, the Galactic Union had maintained absolute military supremacy through superior technology and overwhelming numbers. The Terrans had just demonstrated that both advantages were meaningless against enemies who possessed weapons that operated outside known science. "Admiral," his communications officer announced, "final transmission from the Terran fleet." Harrison appeared on screen one last time, standing in a command center that showed tactical displays covering the entire sector. Behind him, Corvin could see strategic information indicating Terran monitoring capabilities that extended far beyond their home system. "Admiral Corvin," Harrison said, "I want you to understand what's about to happen to your civilization. The Union reinforcement fleets currently en route to this system will arrive in approximately 48 hours. They'll find wreckage from the most powerful military force in galactic history, destroyed by weapons they didn't know existed." "And then?" Corvin asked, though quantum cascade effects were already beginning to destabilize his ship's hull integrity. "Then, they'll realize that their choice is simple," Harrison replied. "Negotiate with humanity as equals, or discover what happens when we stop holding back." The transmission ended as the universal justice succumbed to quantum cascade failure. Admiral Corvin final thought, preserved for a brief moment in his cybernetic implants before they too were destroyed, was that the galaxy was about to learn why some species preferred death to submission, and why humans had spent 2 centuries preparing to make that preference devastatingly expensive for anyone who tested it. 18 hours later, Union Command received automated distress beacons from the engagement zone, broadcasting tactical recordings that would reshape every strategic assumption about interstellar warfare. Supreme Coordinator Ast reviewed the sensor data in his private chambers, his crystalline form cycling through color patterns that indicated profound shock and growing fear. The recordings showed the systematic destruction of the most powerful fleet in galactic history by weapons that operated beyond known physics. Ships that should have been invulnerable were erased from existence by technologies that attacked matter at the quantum level. Energy signatures suggested power generation capabilities that rivaled stellar output. But most disturbing were the communications intercepts that revealed Terran planning extending far beyond the immediate engagement. The humans had been monitoring Union fleet movements throughout the galaxy, tracking military deployments and strategic planning with intelligence capabilities that suggested infiltration at the highest levels of Union government. Analysis: Ast ordered his senior advisors, who had materialized as holograms around his chamber. Supreme Coordinator, replied Intelligence Director Morveth, the Terrans have demonstrated military technologies that exceed our capabilities by significant margins. Their weapons systems operate on principles we don't understand, and their intelligence gathering suggests they've been preparing for this conflict for far longer than we realized. More concerning, added Admiral Torben, emergency replacement for the deceased Corvin-TH, their strategic planning indicates capabilities that extend far beyond their home system. These aren't defensive weapons, Supreme Coordinator. These are tools designed for interstellar warfare against technologically superior opponents. ASTHAN processed the implications through cognitive matrices enhanced by 2 millennia of political experience. The Union faced an enemy that possessed superior weapons, demonstrated the willingness to use them, and had prepared extensively for large-scale conflict against galactic civilizations. For the first time in Union history, they confronted an opponent that represented an existential threat to their continued existence. Options, he asked. Military victory remains possible, Admiral Torben replied, though his voice lacked conviction. The Union.